A dragnet over Houston as police search for a convicted killer, a death row inmate who, they say, simply walked out of jail in Houston. How?
Might as well give it a shot at freedom, right? So I threw caution to the wind. I ran out to jail, did a quick change into some gym clothes, and got on the bike path like a jogger. And then here comes a freight train. I was like, there's my ride. Took me 3 days to get 250 miles on a freight train. There's plenty of stops, sleeping in train yards. They came running up and grabbed me, slammed me on the ground, and had a knee in my neck, foot in my back, barrels pressed up against my body. Then I'll start jumping around, high-fiving each other. We got him, we got him. I was sick. I was sicker than I was the first time I got the death sentence, knowing that I was coming back to this place.
On the night of April 29, 1998, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Texas became the site of a tragedy that would spiral into a story of betrayal, violence, and a man determined to escape the consequences of his actions. Charles Victor Thompson, a man struggling with addiction and rage, drove to his ex-girlfriend's apartment. What began as a confrontation over a broken relationship escalated into a violent crime that left 2 lives shattered. But this wasn't just a simple murder. The crime set off a series of events that would haunt the justice system for years. A man with a violent past, fueled by jealousy and desperation, would not only claim lives that night but would later attempt to escape the very system designed to hold him accountable. Thompson's story didn't end with his capture. It continued through a web of legal battles, a daring escape, and shocking revelations that no one saw coming. Thompson's actions were not the result of a single moment of violence. They were the culmination of years of escalating rage and untreated emotional turmoil. But how did it all unfold? And how did a man convicted of such a brutal crime end up on death row after a trail of twisted decisions and dangerous choices? This case didn't end with the crime. It stretched across years of trials, escapes, and decisions that shocked everyone involved. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss how it all unfolds. Charles Victor Thompson, a 27-year-old man from Tomball, Texas, had long struggled with personal demons. Throughout his life, he battled substance abuse and a cycle of failed relationships. By 1998, the impact of years of alcohol and cocaine use had taken a heavy toll on him, leaving him mentally unstable and prone to outbursts. His life had become a tangled mess of rage, frustration, and a desire for control, all of which would soon come to a head. Thompson's past was marked by volatile relationships, none more destructive than the one he shared with Denise Hlipp. She had been his girlfriend, but the relationship had ended in turmoil, as many of Thompson's relationships did. Despite the breakup, he struggled to let go. When he found out that Denise had moved on, his emotions took over in the worst way. Denise Hlipp, a 39-year-old woman and mother, was doing her best to rebuild her life. After enduring years of hardship, she had found a glimmer of hope in a new relationship with Darren Kane, a 30-year-old bartender. Denise saw in Darren the possibility of stability and a fresh start, a chance to heal from the emotional scars of her past. But what Denise didn't know was that the very attempt to escape her past would ignite an even darker chapter in her life. For Darren Kane, this was a fresh opportunity to offer Denise the support she needed. Darren was a kind-hearted man who simply wanted to help Denise start over. But in doing so, he found himself caught between the toxic emotions of Thompson, who was unwilling to let go of the past, and a woman who simply wanted to move forward. Darren, in essence, became an innocent bystander to a much larger conflict, one that would have tragic consequences. In the days leading up to April 29, 1998, Thompson's jealousy grew steadily. Denise had begun to build a future with Darren, and Thompson was growing increasingly resentful. His jealousy began to consume him, and by that night, the anger he had carried for so long turned into something much more dangerous. He had always been a man on the edge, but on this night, that edge would break. Thompson's actions would set into motion a series of events that no one could have predicted. A confrontation that started as an argument would spiral into a situation that left 2 lives destroyed and a family forever altered. For Denise and Darren, a new life together became impossible, and for Thompson, the consequences of his violent decisions would ripple through the years, shaping the remainder of his life and the lives of those who knew him. On the night of April 29, 1998, Charles Victor Thompson's emotions reached a critical point. After a day spent drinking and using cocaine, his thoughts became clouded by anger and frustration. Thompson had struggled with emotional instability for years, but it was his relationship with Denise Hlip that continued to haunt him. Denise had recently moved on from Thompson, finding a new partner, Darren Kane. Their relationship represented a fresh start for her, a chance to leave behind the turbulence of her past. But Thompson couldn't accept this. His jealousy festered, and he became consumed by the idea that Denise had rejected him for someone else. His anger, already present for months, finally exploded. That night, Thompson drove to Denise's apartment, determined to confront her. When he arrived, tensions were high. The confrontation began as an argument, but quickly escalated. Words were exchanged and emotions ran wild. As the exchange grew more intense, Thompson's actions became more impulsive. The situation spiraled out of control. Darren Kane, caught in the middle of this explosive argument, found himself in a situation he never anticipated. The disagreement escalated into a violent clash that would change everything. Thompson, in the heat of the moment, made a decision that sealed the fate of two people. Denise Hlip was critically injured, while Darren Kane was tragically killed in the confrontation. Denise, though badly hurt, was still alive when she was rushed to the hospital. The hours following the attack were filled with uncertainty, as doctors did everything they could to save her. But despite their best efforts, Denise would later succumb to her injuries, turning what could have been a manslaughter case into a capital murder charge. The police arrived quickly and began their investigation. Evidence from the scene, including witness testimonies and forensic analysis, soon pointed to Thompson. Witnesses heard shouting from the apartment and saw Thompson leaving the scene. Investigators quickly connected the dots. The forensic evidence, ballistics as well as Thompson's possession of the weapon, were clear indications of his involvement. Though Denise managed to identify Thompson as her attacker, she slipped into unconsciousness and was unable to provide further details. Tragically, her death shortly afterward added another layer of complexity to the case, as it now involved murder rather than an assault. The police investigation continued, with law enforcement piecing together Thompson's emotional and psychological state leading up to the crime. His rage, fueled by jealousy and resentment, had led him to make a choice that would forever alter the course of several lives. In the hours following the incident, investigators began piecing together the events that led to the tragic deaths of Darren Kane and Denise Hlip. The crime scene provided vital clues, and forensic evidence quickly pointed to Charles Victor Thompson as the primary suspect. The first crucial piece of evidence was the gunshot residue found on Thompson's hands. This evidence immediately linked him to the shooting, as it was clear that no one else had been present when the shots were fired. Witnesses testified that they saw Thompson leaving Denise Hlip's apartment shortly after the incident, further corroborating the theory that he was responsible for what had happened. Despite being severely injured, Denise Hlip played a pivotal role in identifying her attacker. She was able to identify Thompson before losing consciousness. This identification was instrumental in moving the investigation forward, providing a strong lead for the authorities to pursue. Sadly, Denise's injuries ultimately led to her passing, but her identification of Thompson proved crucial in the case. Law enforcement quickly expanded their investigation to include Thompson's previous behavior, revealing a history of threats made towards Denise and Darren. Over the weeks leading up to the crime, Thompson had shown increasing signs of jealousy and frustration. He had repeatedly made threats, expressing anger over Denise's new relationship with Darren. These threats became key pieces of evidence that would support the prosecution's case. The ballistics report confirmed that the weapon used in the crime had been registered to Thompson. This piece of evidence linked him directly to the shooting. Further investigation showed that Thompson had used this weapon in previous incidents, highlighting a pattern of violence and escalating behavior over time. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Thompson's actions were not a sudden outburst but the result of mounting emotional tension and unresolved rage. His behavior had been escalating for months, and the tragic events of that night were the culmination of a cycle of jealousy and violence. With the forensic evidence, witness testimony, and a thorough examination of Thompson's past, authorities were able to build a strong case against him. Thompson was arrested and charged with capital murder, and his actions would soon be put under scrutiny in a courtroom, where the long legal battle would begin. However, this was just the beginning of the journey toward justice for Denise Hlip and Darren Cain, as the case continued to unfold through multiple layers of legal proceedings and appeals. The case against Charles Victor Thompson took center stage in 1999, where the proceedings would determine not only his guilt but also the degree of responsibility he held for the tragic deaths of Denise Hlip and Darren Cain. The trial quickly became a significant moment in the pursuit of justice for the victims, and the courtroom drama unfolded with tension. The prosecution wasted no time in presenting their case, which was built around a compelling timeline of events. Their argument rested heavily on the evidence that Thompson's actions were driven by jealousy and violence. Witnesses testified about Thompson's behavior leading up to the crime, how his anger and frustration with Denise's new relationship had been building over weeks. This growing emotional tension was critical in understanding the motive behind the violence. The murder weapon also became a key part of the prosecution's argument. They pointed out that Thompson had brought the weapon with him to Denise's apartment, a clear indication that the events that unfolded that night had not been spontaneous. The forensic evidence supported this claim, showing that Thompson had both possession of the weapon and used it intentionally. On the other side, the defense team worked to create doubt about Thompson's culpability. They attempted to argue that Denise's death might have been influenced by medical issues, suggesting that factors other than Thompson's actions had led to her passing. They also challenged the witness testimony, questioning the reliability of those who had seen Thompson at the scene. Despite these attempts to cast doubt, the jury remained unconvinced. After deliberating for just a few hours, they returned a guilty verdict, finding Thompson responsible for the capital murder of both Denise Hlip and Darren Cain. The decision sent a clear message: justice was being served, though it marked just the beginning of the long legal battles ahead. The sentence was handed down swiftly: death. The families of the victims, who had been waiting for this moment, felt a sense of relief that Thompson would be held accountable for his actions. For the families of Denise and Darren, the decision marked the start of their path toward closure, even though it was clear that the impact of their loss would never truly be erased. Thompson's conviction and death sentence did not, however, bring immediate resolution. The long appeals process was just beginning, and the case would continue to unfold in the years that followed. Despite the verdict, there was still much more to come, and the final chapter in Thompson's case would take years to resolve. In 2005, just days after being sentenced to death, Charles Victor Thompson managed to pull off a stunning escape from Harris County Jail. The authorities were caught completely off guard. Thompson's escape wasn't the result of a random opportunity, it was the outcome of a carefully planned effort, revealing flaws in the system that allowed him a brief chance at freedom. Using a smuggled handcuff key and a fake ID, Thompson was able to bypass the security at one of the state's most secure facilities. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but rather a deliberate and thought-out plan that made the escape seem almost effortless. Thompson, who had spent years behind bars, was determined to avoid his impending execution, and he knew that only by escaping could he delay the inevitable. For the next 3 days, Thompson was on the run. His movements were swift, but law enforcement quickly launched a nationwide manhunt. Despite his efforts to cover his tracks, authorities were closing in on him. Thompson, knowing the heat was on, tried to flee as far as he could. But his time on the run didn't last long. Eventually he was traced to Shreveport, Louisiana. When officers located him, he was found intoxicated and attempting to cross state lines, likely hoping to flee out of the country. His capture was the result of an intensive search, and he was soon brought back to Texas to face the consequences of his escape. Once Thompson was back in the system, it became clear that his brief taste of freedom had not only exposed weaknesses in the prison system but had also added another layer of complexity to his case. His escape added fuel to the legal fire, creating another chapter in the long legal battle that continued well beyond his arrest. The authorities' swift response and eventual capture of Thompson were a relief, but his escape had a lasting impact, one that would stay with him for the rest of his time on death row. It was a reminder of how determined and resourceful he could be in trying to avoid his fate. But in the end, Thompson's freedom was short-lived, and justice would eventually find its way back to him. After spending over 2 decades on death row, Charles Victor Thompson's legal battles continued as his attorneys sought every possible avenue to delay his execution. Over the years, Thompson's defense team filed numerous appeals, hoping to overturn his conviction. They pursued federal habeas corpus petitions and raised questions about the fairness of the trial and his mental state. However, despite these efforts, all the appeals were ultimately denied. Thompson's legal team was determined to fight against the execution date, raising concerns about the legal procedures involved in the case. Yet, their efforts to present new evidence or delay the execution proved unsuccessful. With each petition dismissed, it became increasingly clear that Thompson's sentence would stand, and his fate was drawing closer. The execution date was finally set for January 28, 2026. This marked the end of a long process, a case that had stretched across many years of legal proceedings, full of complex motions, multiple trials, and extended appeals. For those who had been affected by the crime, this date became the moment they had been waiting for, a sense of closure after a long and painful battle for justice. For the families of Denise Hlip and Darren Kane, the execution offered a chance for finality after decades of waiting. They had been through a protracted legal process, with each delay and appeal adding to their distress. But now, after years of uncertainty, the state had finally set a date for Thompson's punishment. The decision to proceed with the execution did not come without debate. The death penalty remains a controversial subject, with many questioning its morality and effectiveness. While some viewed the execution as justice finally being served, others reflected on whether the system had truly provided the right resolution for such a tragic case. For the families, the path to closure had been long and filled with emotional strain. The execution was not something they sought out of vengeance, but as a way to bring an end to the long fight for justice. With Thompson's final date set, the legal journey had come full circle. Yet, the emotional weight of the case would linger with the families long after the legal process concluded. As the execution date nears, many will reflect on the decades-long process, from Thompson's crime to the final legal steps that led to this conclusion. What had begun as a senseless tragedy for Denise and Darren had been compounded by years of delays, appeals, and the complexities of the criminal justice system. But for those who have waited for justice to be served, this day represents a sense of closure, the end of a painful chapter in their lives. For the families of Denise Hlip and Darren Kane, the years of waiting, legal battles, and emotional toll had finally led to a moment of resolution. Charles Victor Thompson's execution date was set, and the long journey toward justice appeared to be drawing to a close. The court had rendered its decision, and the punishment for his actions was determined. For many, this marked the final chapter in a painful and drawn-out story. But while the legal process had brought justice in a legal sense, the question remained, was this closure? Could the execution of Thompson truly heal the wounds caused by his violent actions? For the families who had suffered so much, the answer wasn't so simple. After years of grief, uncertainty, and the constant battle for justice, was this the end of their journey, or was it just another moment in a longer process of healing? The death penalty, often seen as the final step in the pursuit of justice, has long been a point of debate. Does it bring true justice? Or does it only serve to extend the pain of those who have already suffered loss? As Thompson's case draws to a close, these larger questions linger in the background, forcing the audience to reflect on the nature of justice and punishment in a system designed to right the wrongs of society. For the families, the execution may provide a sense of finality, but it does not bring back the loved ones they lost. Justice may have been served, but closure remains an elusive concept, one that will differ for everyone who has been touched by this tragic case. If you want more in-depth investigations into real-life cases like this, hit the subscribe button now. Join us as we uncover the truth behind some of the most gripping true crime stories.